from the BBC World Service in association with ABC and All India Radio. This is Stumped.
Hello and welcome to Stumped, your intercontinental hit of news, features and debate from the quirky world of cricket. I'm Alison Mitchell, now in Adelaide. The border opened. I dashed across. Well, in fact, I was hiking in the mountains, in the hills and the Grampians last weekend, so I made it back from there safely and now back in the house with some family members. So sharing the house here with a couple of sporty kids, a pretty lively black Labradoodle who may or may not make an appearance. She's under strict instructions not to bark because I know that would interfere with Jim's cuckoo clock.
Cuckoo clock's had a crisis, but the cricket season splutters on with T20 in New Zealand, one day and Sheffield Shield cricket elsewhere. But, let's get a bit of distraction going here. Look at this. Isn't this fantastic? That's a barn owl, right? Embroidered by my wonderful wife, Jen. That's why we're having visuals on Stumped. And I thought it'd be good if you saw that. If you couldn't see it, it was a barn owl. It was beautiful.
Hello, this is Charu Sharma for All India Radio in Bangalore, back at home, because as you can make out, no regal Mayo College backdrop behind me, but it is nice to be back. And of course, cricket-wise, the domestic ODI tournament's about to reach a high-scoring end, which is not the same that we can share about the Ahmedabad Test match once again.
Our show did not age well last week, did it? The Test match over in 2 days. We were talking about day one. Went to bed here in Australia, woke up and it was all over. And that hadn't happened to England, a two-day test, since 1921. So that is where we're going to start with and really just looking at how England got into such a tangle against spin. But firstly, to focus on India, Charu, how well did they equip themselves compared to England?
Well, the pitch did cop a lot of criticism, and by extension, of course, the BCCI and Indian cricket. But we'll have to suggest that the English players seem to be underprepared to face local conditions. The Indians handled home advantage better. They had a better set of man-to-man personnel. The spinners particularly, of course, utilized home conditions by knowing where to bowl, the line and length, and they were clearly the better set of spinners. And of course, they won because the batsmen also scored a few more runs, just utilizing that home conditions. I'm just very happy that the English team, particularly Joe Root, was very gracious about it. So, yeah, the Indians handled conditions a lot better.
Even if I'd been an Indian supporter, I wouldn't have been happy for the game for Test cricket, because you don't want two-day Test matches. I mean, there was a three-dayer, wasn't it, India and Australia at the Adelaide Oval in December. But what was your overriding feeling?
Well, they call them Test matches, and sometimes the conditions can be awkward. And they certainly were for England's batsmen, and they were outskilled by better spin bowling. And that's why the game went so quickly on, obviously, a surface that wasn't reliable for batting. It was pretty obvious from the first day, with a few exploding out of the surface. But this happens sometimes, and it's going to happen in India. And as I said before, I'm really surprised that batsmen don't develop a better footwork against spin bowling, probably because a lot of them don't play against good spin bowling often enough. Clearly, England will learn by the experience. Much better than watching a 5-day test when only 3 innings are played, that's for sure.
Well, talking about batting against spin, we're going to explore that in depth in a moment with our very special guest. Just before that, just to touch on, the pitch was the subject of so much debate. And Charu, you mentioned you thought that Joe Root had been very gracious about it. Well, we listened to former England spinner Phil Tufnell just saying the pitch took the skill away from the players. Ex-England captain Andrew Strauss described it as a lottery. So let's get the Indian perspective and have a listen to what the Indian captain Virat Kohli has had to say.
We lost in New Zealand on day 3 in 36 overs. I'm sure none of our people as well wrote about the pitch. It was all about how India played badly in New Zealand. And none of the pitches were criticized. No one came and saw how much the pitch was doing, how much the ball was moving, and how much grass there was on the pitches. So the reason for our success as a team has been that we haven't cribbed about any pitches that we played on. And we would continue to play like that as a team moving forward as well. And yeah, it is always been the case that spinning tracks come into focus way more. And when the ball seams on a particular pitch and teams get bundled out for 40, 50, 60, no one writes about the pitch. It's always about bad batting. So I think we all need to be very honest with ourselves that what space are we talking from and what's the idea behind continuing this narrative, and what purpose it serves people who keep continuing this conversation, which is quite one-sided.
So a seaming pitch, it's okay. If a side's skittled, it's always down to bad batting, but if it's a spinning track, it's unacceptable. Charu, does he have a point?
Well, I mean, from the Indian standpoint, for sure, because they've been caught on seaming pitches in England and Australia, even in South Africa at Kingsmead. I remember that 166, the 2 innings. I mean, the ball was darting around like a devil. How do you combat it with very good fast bowlers? So if the fast bowlers are going to utilize fast bowling conditions well, especially in their home territories, then teams do get skittled out for very low scores. And I suppose in that sense, you'll have to say that if home conditions in India mean spinning conditions, then teams have a chance of getting skittled out if they're not used to those conditions. I think Jim mentioned that as well. It's a question of learning how to display your skills under different conditions. And the Indians very often, or other nations, get caught out on green tracks. You can't possibly create these kind of tracks at home, but you can certainly learn the art of playing spinners a little better, because you will find those challenges in different conditions at the top level of the game.
Well, let's find out exactly what it will take for England to combat spin in the subcontinent. And an Englishman who was an excellent player of spin and who this week has been announced as the ECB's new elite batting coach is former England opener Marcus Trescothick. And he's here with us now as well. Marcus, welcome to Stumped. Thanks for coming on.
No problem. Good morning or good afternoon, good evening, wherever we are in the world.
Yeah, all three. It's a bit of $1 million question, isn't it? But one England need to figure out pretty quickly. How can they combat spin in India?
Yeah, it's tricky. The pitch is, proved to be a massive talking point, as we know, but it's just trying to come up with a method. You've got to try and get something that you rely on. First and foremost, I think having a good defence is going to be pivotal. If you can have that in your armoury where you can face these deliveries and bat for a long period of time, you will get used to the spin and a better understanding of where you can score. So, you need a bit more time in that sort of environment. And I think everyone's right in saying that you need to get used to these conditions. These are extreme conditions. And when it's like this, it is tricky. But you learn how to get a method. And the more you do that, and the more you play on these type of pitches, the better you get at that.
Congratulations on the job, by the way. I didn't actually say that. But what was key for you then? And I mean, thinking particularly the winter tour you went on in 2001 in India, you really sort of established yourself as a premier player of spin for England. What was your key?
So I reckon this all started for me learning how to play spin when our first trip, when we went to, Pakistan first, then I went to Sri Lanka, and then I went to India. So I had 3 trips away, all to the subcontinent. And in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, I was starting to work very closely with Duncan Fletcher to try and gain a better understanding and a better technique about playing spin. I could always sweep. And that was always my go-to. But I just didn't really have much more of a game plan after that. If they bowled bad balls, of course, you put them away. But once you get up to the international level, you get less and less of those type of deliveries. So I was learning a different method just to try and get me a better defensive technique and then enable me to play better off the front foot and back foot and not rely just on playing the sweep.
Hi, Marcus. This is Charu Sharma from Bangalore. And congratulations on your new role. Good to see you back in cricket, particularly for England. To an extent, of course, there was talk about England having gone through to Sri Lanka first and playing the conditions there and actually doing pretty well, and therefore being somewhat more ready for India. But what more can players do at the highest level to be better prepared for different conditions, in this case, spinning conditions?
Look, I think the preparation time that you would have leading up to test matches, they would have been doing everything they possibly can. If we look at the games in Sri Lanka, the pitches did spin, but they were very slow spin and didn't really bounce. I think when you get the combination of bounce and spin is when it really becomes quite tricky because, as we've seen, the ball was bouncing a lot more. So I think it's a combination of different things. And of course, the ball skidded a lot more than what they probably expected. And in my experience, that's the most challenging part, is when the ball skids on one delivery and the ball then really spins on the next one, then you're really unsure what you're trying to do. Quite a lot of it relies on controlling your emotions, in my experience. When the ball really spins, the emotion suddenly, whoa, look at that. The ball spun really big and everyone's really heightened an awareness to it. And then you suddenly get caught up into what's going on so much rather than just try and staying calm. I don't know if we do that yet with playing spin. And I think that's something that we can learn and get better at.
Marcus, Jim Maxwell in Sydney, congratulations on this role. But what excites you about it? What can you offer the players as the batting coach?
Well, it's $1 million question, isn't it? I think, having spent numerous years playing international cricket, you sort of gain an understanding of what the game needs. What players will face, in different challenges from Australia to India, the different styles, techniques, controlling the game. And it's just, you try and, well, as a coach, you try and learn the different ways of getting that information across. That's the real skill that I'm learning at the moment. But, I've experienced it in all different parts of the world. And then hopefully I can combine that with a bit of a technical information that I'm learning and gaining, and then try and help these players sort of move along. But, I think it's communication, it's understanding, it's learning what goes on, and then try and helping these guys as they go through the various places, various series, and sort of get better themselves.
And do you know when your first trip is, when you're starting?
I was meant to be in India at the moment, but unfortunately we had a family bereavement, so I had to miss the flight, and that's been put on hold. It will be, I'm guessing, obviously now sort of October, November, World T20s, fingers crossed. I'd love to be involved in something like that, but my role will be working across different platforms, from young Lions to the main England side, so I don't know where I'll be at this point.
Well, best of luck with it all, and thanks so much for coming on Stumped. It's great to hear your words of wisdom about batting and against spin in particular. So good luck with the role, and we'll look forward to catching up with you in due course again, I'm sure.
Thanks very much.
Great to have you on. Marcus Trescothick, ECB's new elite batting coach.
From the BBC World Service, this is Stumped on All India Radio.
Well, from one two-day test to another, and Afghanistan's men played Zimbabwe in their first test match since the start of the pandemic. Zimbabwe won by 10 wickets. There was a century from captain Sean Williams, and that really helped to ease them to victory. Jim, they were in fact meant to play Australia, weren't they, Afghanistan, last year, and it didn't happen. You wonder just how painful a result that might have been if they had played Australia. But, this match might not have been a great advert for Test cricket in the same day, really, that the two-day test in Ahmedabad wasn't either. But at least we are seeing the smaller cricket nations get back into cricket, and Test cricket in particular.
Yes, and that's important that they're playing it. But you do wonder longer term with the way the game is moving through the influence, particularly of T20, whether it's going to be worthwhile for these countries to be playing Test cricket. Yes, it's great that they are, and can they afford to continue to do it and all those things. But yeah, it's not a great look, and I really do fear for that game when Australia plays Afghanistan. I'm really hoping for a very flat pitch.
I don't want to be disrespectful to Afghanistan cricket, but I mean, the writing's on the wall. And I think Alison or perhaps Jim, both of you mentioned it, that should we really be pushing test match cricket for all the newer nations? Because they're really in there because of the excitement created by T20 and perhaps, of course, one-day internationals. Afghanistan can be so good at the shorter form. Why must they be so short in test matches? Because, of course, you mentioned the first time it was 2 days, it was right here in Bangalore, their first ever test.
But they aspire to it, and I think you need to feed aspiration. And when you think of, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, how long it took for them to win their first test matches, I mean, okay, they're still not the richest nations by any means, but when we talk about the impact of the pandemic, we've highlighted quite a lot, haven't we? The disproportionate impact it's had on women's cricket, but in fact it's had a real disproportionate impact on the smaller nations, like the associate nations as well. And Scotland, I looked up, December 2019 was the last time they played an ODI, and their last T20s were 2 months before that. One thing I just thought was worth pointing out, though, was that a company called Free Sports has done a deal to broadcast all matches involving Afghanistan and Zimbabwe live on free-to-air over the next 3 years. It's an online streaming company, and you think, well, that's surely going to be bringing in some money, and the proliferation of live streaming could really be a boon to the smaller countries who do desperately need the money. Now, Charu, one thing to you, the PSL, it's been postponed, the Pakistan Super League, because there's been 7 positive COVID cases, including England's Tom Banton, Lewis Gregory. And of course, the PCB have to focus on the safety of all their participants. So what's happening there? And lots of testing, and then they'll get it back up? What do you think? And what implications could this be for other T20 leagues?
Well, for starters, of course, this is not good news, because obviously some countries which are better funded can create the kind of secure bio-bubble that these events need, and some countries can't. And I've often said in the past that in populous countries in South Asia, it's going to be a nightmare to try and create that bio-bubble. Of course, India, because of its relative wealth, could attempt to create that bubble, but still there'd be so many breaches of protocol because of just the way things are structured in these countries, where people feel pretty happy to walk on it, regardless of the fact that they're breaking protocol. So this is not a good sign. We're all very happy if there's more cricket that happens in Pakistan, because they've been set back for so many years. But it just goes on to show that, one, of course, we're not free of the pandemic as such, and no amount of testing can really help, because, well, a cure, which has now started through the vaccines, is really the way out. But the numbers of the world and the numbers of vaccines that can be created is going to take a very long time for everybody to be reasonably safe. I think it's a lesson, once again, that postponement, perhaps, or should we say, what's the cliche here, that discretion is the better part of valor for all these leagues as well. So hold on, let there be a cure, let everybody get inoculated, vaccinated or whatever, and then plan this, because it just leaves a very sour taste in the mouth. Can you imagine the kind of logistics and effort that's gone into the making of even the PSL? It may not be like an IPL, but it's a big event. And for everybody to disband and try and meet again, it's a nightmare financially, commercially, all the contracts for television and everything else. So I really think
this have knock-ons for the IPL, players playing in both, and broadcast personnel involved in both.
Everybody. I mean, this is a little premature now for the IPL, but since you mentioned it, Alison, because already there are all sorts of noises being made in India about what kind of spectator situation is there going to be in the IPL, because they're very certainly going to hold it this year again very quickly after the last season. But there's so much to be said about the spectators in terms of the excitement, and in India much more so for all the teams about revenue as well. And if the spectators are not going to be there, because even in India, as I mentioned, it may not be easy to create these bio bubbles. And cricket has always been sport is a soft target. And you get a few people turning up positive, and, the authorities might clamp down very heavily on such events, which would be a shame. So this is a really tough one for the PSL right now, and maybe for the IPL in days to come.
Well, that is it for this week's Stumped here on All India Radio. Don't forget you can stay in touch with us throughout the week. Make sure you use the hashtag BBC Stumped. So my thanks to my co-hosts Charu Sharma and Jim Maxwell, and all of you for listening. We'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.
Stumped is a BBC sport production for the BBC World Service, in association with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation and All India Radio.